This Week in Radio Tech, episode 160, is brought to you by Telos and Axia, working together with Livewire IP audio for fast and easy integration into your studios.
And now, our feature presentation.
TWiRT.
The Tell City waiver and the Mattoon waiver and the new FMC0 class. Say what? We're talking about him on this week's TWiRT.
All right, calm down. He says that to everyone.
This calls for immediate discussion.
What's up, Doc?
All your days are belong to us.
From his palatial office of important business,
or in a choice hotel in a distant land,
this is Kirk Harnack.
Chris Tobin and Tom Ray join me in welcoming John Garziglia. He's a Tesla driving communications attorney. You're going to like him.
You're dialed in to This Week in Radio Tech.
Hey, this is Kirk Harnack, and you're tuned in to This Week in Radio Tech. I am Kirk Harnack, your host. Very glad to have you along with us. This is the show where we talk about radio technology, and usually we get into some of the propeller head stuff and the fine points of audio amplification or audio processing or FM transmission or AM transmission or reception, and some of the streaming audio and video and things like that. This episode is a bit different. We've got a real treat. There's this big mysterious thing in Washington, D.C. that U.S. broadcasters have to deal with or have to pay somebody else to deal with from time to time. And we've got the expert at dealing with the Federal Communications Commission. Our guest on this week's show is John Garziglia. We'll introduce him in just a moment. First, I want to bring in our usual co-hosts on the program. First of all, the best-dressed engineer in radio from Manhattan, New York. Please welcome Chris Tobin. Hey, Chris.
Hello, Kirk, John, Tom. I'm doing well. All is in good shape, and despite the crazy weather we're having here in New York, it's good. A little cool. But I'm with the folks at CCS Music Cam USA, and we manufacture IP codecs for audio and video and working on some other stuff, so just for disclosure purposes. And
always glad to get the
things
weather. Always glad to get the weather forecast from Manhattan, Chris Tobin. You know what we ought to start doing is tell us what you had for lunch today.
No, that's nothing special. It's funny when I talk to folks around the globe, they're always like, the second question is, after they say, how are you? It's like, what's the weather like? What's going on? So I've been getting in the habit of giving out the weather information. But I don't know, for some reason people enjoy that from other parts of the world. So I thought I'd go with it.
Sure, and it works great. You do it every week, and I appreciate it. Also with us, our usual co-host from also in the New York area, outside New York, the Hudson Valley. Gorgeous place. Tom Ray is with us. Hey, Tom, welcome in.
Greetings and salivations, Kirk. Doing well, and yes, the weather. Don't ask me about the weather. We had groundhog for supper, but anyway.
Oh gosh. Oh, well, I've been spending the last week in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina. Actually, on vacation with the family. Last year, we were here during my daughter's spring break, and it was warm. It was warm enough to go to the beach. It was actually enjoyable during the middle of the afternoon. But this week, not so much. About 58 degrees for the high today and a lot of cold wind coming in from the Atlantic Ocean. So it hasn't been so great. Hey, by the way, the studio I'm in, this is the voiceover studio from my friend and former colleague in radio, actually, Roger Gaither. Roger is part, so I want to thank Roger for letting me use the studio. Roger's part of Broadcast Design Interactive. And if you're just curious about the nice people who let me use their voiceover studio, you can go to the web, BDIADV, as in BDI Advertising, BDIADV.com is the website. Thanks a lot, Roger, for letting me use it. Also, Chris Johnson, Roger's partner. Thanks for letting me broadcast live from the voiceover studio here in Charleston, South Carolina, on the lovely Isle of Palms. Now, let's bring in our guest. I'm just so delighted. I was talking to John Garziglia about, 6 weeks ago about being a guest on the show. And then we had several other people come in, and it just got a little crazy. Finally, we're able to have an open week here, an open Thursday, and bring John into our program. John is a communications attorney with an outfit called, I'll think of it here in a second. It's
Womble Carlyle, right?
That's it. Womble Carlyle. Yes. John Garziglia, say hi. Good to have you on the show.
I said hello, I think, but hello.
Well, great.
And, there was a dusting of snow here this morning, by the way, to complete the cycle.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Winter's still in Washington.
Oh, my gosh.
And if I'd known Chris was going to wear a tie, I would have put a tie on also.
This is the first time we've had an attorney on our show, at least that I know of. And a communications attorney can can really get a broadcaster out of a fix or help a broadcaster increase the value of his radio station by getting something moved in to a more desirable area, by solving a dispute between broadcasters. And I thought we'd just start out by starting out. John, what are some of the things that broadcasters call upon you to do for them, to fix for them? What is a communications attorney before the FCC representing radio stations? What do you do?
Well, in today's world, mostly transactions and regulatory questions, license renewals, and just most recently, I've been swamped with FM translator work because a number of my clients in the 2003 translator window filed for FM translators back then, not really knowing what they might be good for. And in the interim, we've seen the FCC change its rules so that AM stations can be carried on FM translators, as well as HD2 and HD3 programming streams, which has a value to a broadcaster in today's world.
So wait, 2003 was the last window. That was 10 years ago, right?
Almost exactly 10 years ago. The scary thing is, as we're filling out applications here this month for translators, we're finding dates of signatures like March 17th, 2003 is when the application was filed. So it's that close. 10 years
I got to believe, I don't mean to be morbid, but I got to believe that a few people who signed applications for translators 10 years ago are dead now.
We have that situation, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
And, of course, the usual ownership changes and things like that. So it's something to deal with,
Wow. Is this par for is this the new normal for the FCC to take 10 years to begin dealing with something that they opened up?
Well, the translator thing is a special issue because translators are intertwined with LPFMs. And as you may know about the LPFM proceeding and all the controversy that surrounded LPFMs, the LPFM window was opened back in 2000. And then the FM translator window followed almost directly after that in 2003. And LPFM broadcasters saw these 13,000 FM translators being filed and thought that they may be blocking out LPFMs in many places, and in fact, they probably did. So about 10 years of litigation ensued. Congressional Act in 2010, it was the Local Community Radio Act of 2010, which put LPFMs on the same par as translators, lifted third adjacent channel spacings for LPFMs, and basically allowed the FCC to move ahead with translator processing, as well as opening an LPFM window later in this year, hopefully.
Somebody said, and I think it's been attributed to you, that LPFMs so often are simply hobby broadcasters who want to play radio. How is that?
Jeez. Oh, I'm so sorry you saw that. I really, when I looked at that, I opened up Radio World this week. It just looks so much different when it's in a headline, I guess, when it's in bold, in big type on a page rather than being in small type. Here it is. I have it. And in fact, I've gotten a few letters from LPFM broadcasters that have said, what is this? And I think Radio World is going to get a few letters to the editor on this, and I'm still thinking about whether I respond or not. But no, they make a good point. Not all LPFM broadcasters are hobby broadcasters, certainly not. And in fact, I'm aware of some very good LPFM stations on the air. Hopefully, LPFM stations in the future provide working grounds or a sort of a school for future broadcasters for larger stations. And but there is a feeling within the broadcast community, within broadcasters, and I guess it's a fear that LPFM stations might become the CB radio of this decade, and that's not a good fear.
Look, we have plenty of viewers and listeners who are not in radio full time, or they only tangentially touch radio, but they're curious about this. FM translators are typically of a lower power level, although some of them can be upwards of 1,000 watts or so. And LPFMs are also low power FM stations. What are the fundamental differences between FM translators and LPFMs?
Okay, let's start with LPFMs. First of all, the way the FCC put together the rules, broadcasters can never own an LPFM. So that's one of the few broadcasting services that, for whatever reason, and some of it was opposition from broadcasters, that the FCC decided that it really is restricted to just not-for-profit organizations and even organizations that aren't broadcasters. LPFM's 100 watts ERP at 30 meters height above average terrain maximum. So that gives a service area 4 or 5 miles. Tom Ray may want to jump in here and give a little bit more of a technical description of the coverage area. But it's 100 watts ERP, and it's got to be owned by a nonprofit entity and a locally owned, for the most part, nonprofit entity, or it can be owned by a school, a statewide school, or something like that. And they originate programming. That's the purpose of LPFMs. Translators, on the other hand, cannot originate programming. They can only, traditionally or historically, they could only rebroadcast FM stations. Now the FCC, since 2003, has opened it up so translators can rebroadcast AM stations, which is a great advantage because for many AM stations that have minuscule power at night or have very bad night patterns, or perhaps even are daytime only, an FM translator can go 24 hours a day for an AM station. And then the other thing that translators can do is rebroadcast HD2 and HD3 streams from FM radio stations, essentially in many medium and smaller sized communities, giving a broadcaster another FM station in that community. Technically, a translator can go maximum of 250 watts as long as it's carrying an in-contour signal, meaning that the translator is not pushing a radio signal outside its 60 dBu for an FM, or its 2 millivolt per meter contour for an AM. But the great advantage for in-contour translators is that it's 250 watts ERP at any height the broadcaster can find to go. So if there is a 1,200-foot or 1,500-foot TV tower, the broadcaster can put a translator on at 250 watts. The broadcaster really does essentially have a Class A or better FM station in their community.
Oh, my goodness. I did not know that. What about, I thought there were 1,000-watt translators. Are those out west somewhere?
There are no 1,000-watt translators. There may very well be translators with 250 watts ERP at such a height that they're equal to or better than 1,000-watt FM stations. Yeah. But so it's 250 watts ERP with depending on if it fits or not technically any height.
Now, you mentioned in-contour FM translators, and you said they can't push out a certain signal radius beyond where it is. So essentially, is that a fill-in if you have maybe a city of financial interest that's within your coverage area but not very well? You can put if space is available, you could put a translator in that city of financial interest?
That's the historical, or the historical view use of translators. So up till 2003, that's really that, and extending the contour of non-commercial stations could use translators and hop them across the United States. And in fact, many religious broadcasters and non-commercial broadcasters still use translators for that purpose, and that is allowed under the FCC rules. But commercial broadcasters could not extend their signal beyond the 60 dBu for FMs with translators, and they still can't. So sure, you can use it in the West, in particular, in mountainous areas like Colorado and California. There are translators that are used as fill-in translators that simply rebroadcast the main station. But more and more broadcasters, at least with this latest crop of translators that's been granted, are seeing the advantage of carrying an AM station on a translator or carrying an HD2 or HD3 signal.
Well, now, help me understand one thing then about you said in contour. What about extra outside of the contour? Can those be owned by a different entity?
A commercial broadcaster cannot own an out-of-contour translator. I mean, the rules are so strict that if, for instance, you had a favorite station, you had a mountain cottage and somewhere outside of Denver, 100 miles outside of Denver, and you just simply for your community wanted to own a translator and bring in an FM station from out of contour into your mountain cottage. If you were a broadcaster owning broadcast stations elsewhere in the country, you could not own that translator. So commercial broadcasters are simply prohibited from owning translators that rebroadcast an out of contour commercial signal.
But somebody else could own that translator, yeah?
They could, but they can't receive any financial compensation from the broadcaster, the main station being carried for doing so. So there's not too much advantage to doing that.
Gotcha. Okay, all right, that makes sense. Well, now recently in the news, there's been a couple of things. It's interesting how the law works, and this is so foreign to us, people who are not attorneys. There's this thing called a waiver, and waivers seem to, once somebody gets a waiver of the rules, then that waiver, I guess, tends to get a name and tends to be able to be used as precedent for subsequent requests for a similar waiver. And there are two that I believe you have been instrumental in working on. One is called the Mattoon waiver, and the other the Tell City waiver. What are these waivers involve? What are you how are you getting around some rules to help a broadcaster out?
Well, these both have to do with FM translators. The dilemma for many AM broadcasters and also broadcasters who want to carry an HD2 or HD3 signal is that the translators that are now out there, the ones that were applied for in 2003 and subsequently granted, or those that even were there before 2003, aren't really where they can do the most good for existing broadcasters. So broadcasters have attempted to move these translators. The FM translator rules, however, restrict the move of a translator no greater than overlap of the translator's existing 60 dBu signal with the proposed 60 dBu signal, which for most translators means you're talking about a move of maybe 5 or 10 miles before those contours do not overlap. Yeah. So if there was a translator 30, 40 miles away that a broadcaster wanted to buy and move to the tower that the main station is on to run an HD2 signal or to run an AM station over it, it was pretty difficult to move. I mean, there was quite an enterprise that developed among some engineers that did translator applications about 2 years ago, where they were hopping. It was called translator hopping, hopping a translator down a road, basically using, in many cases, a sort of cell on wheels type of contraption where they had a tower or a pole in the back of their pickup truck, and they'd apply to move the translator 5 miles down the road, go out and put it on the air for an unspecified amount of time, take it down, file another application for 5 miles down the road, and do that 3 or 4 times. I'm familiar with applications, not thank goodness, not my clients, but there were some applicants that moved them 16, 17 times like that. And the FCC staff pretty much accommodated it for a little while by quickly granting these applications. More recently, the FCC has, the staff, the audio division of the FCC, has pretty much clamped down on it in 2 ways. One is that they do not grant applications for modifications more quickly than 45 days after the application's filed. And then the other way is that they're now very careful in that if a translator has done more than probably 2 hops at this point, it used to be about 3 hops, they put about a 6-month delay on it. So that's pretty much closed down translator hopping. Now, you asked about the waivers, and that's where we get to the Decatur, the Mattoon waiver, and then more recently what's being applied for is being called the Tell City waiver. It's a client of mine, Bud Walters, who just sort of looked at this situation and said, this whole translators hopping situation really doesn't seem to serve the public interest. I mean, here are radio listeners that potentially could hear a radio signal. Here's a broadcaster that wants to provide that signal to the radio listeners, yet the broadcaster is being pretty much required to go through sort of hoops and things that really shouldn't have to happen for a translator to move not too far a distance. So the Mattoon waiver was a compromise with the FCC staff, where the FCC staff agreed with Bud Walters, my client, in fact, who filed this, that if there was the overlap of the interfering contour of the proposed translator, or it could go in reverse, with the predicted contour of the existing translator, in other words, 60-40 dBu overlap, then since that was a mutually exclusive type of relationship, it fit into the same category as modifications for many FM stations, full power FM stations, and NCEs in particular. So therefore, it made sense that if a translator could show that, it should be allowed to move in 1 hop, which gave translators the ability to move maybe 20 miles in some instances, 25 miles in other instances. So that was the Mattoon waiver, and that was granted probably 1.5 years ago now.
It seems like,
and so now you want me to get into the Tell City waiver, or do you want to just
okay. How's that different than the Mattoon waiver?
This was great, and it allowed, in fact, a number of AM stations across the country to acquire an FM translator and move it to a place where it could serve the AM station. And I've had AM broadcasters tell me this is the best thing that's ever happened to their AM station in the last 10 years, that it really has revitalized the service for a number of reasons. Not the least of which is it gives an FM translator gives a consistent day and night signal, and also just the perception in many smaller communities that no one listens to AM anymore. I mean, whether that's true or not, the advertising community in many smaller communities doesn't believe that people listen to AM, and therefore, in many cases, AMs are doing less revenue than they really should be doing for their listenership just because of that advertiser perception. So getting a signal on FM has really helped these AM stations. But there are many AM stations that are just too far from an FM translator that might be available to acquire one and move one under the Mattoon waiver. So Commissioner Pai last, it was the NAB show in Dallas last fall, gave a speech on AM revitalization. And he said he was looking for regulatory barriers that could be removed to help revitalize the AM service. And so Bud and I were just chatting, and Bud says, well, this really is a regulatory barrier, this restriction on moving of AM or FM translators to serve AM stations. Is there anything we can do about this? And Bud and I put our heads together, and one of the things that, and this is one of the, in our conversations with the audio division staff, one of the things they always were insisting on when we were talking about the Mattoon waiver was that there be a limit to moving translators. They were concerned that somebody might take a translator in Idaho and move it to Illinois, for instance, or some great distance. And I can understand that there would need to be a limit on any type of translator move. So we tried to come up with a limit that made sense for AM stations. So what we say in the Tell City waiver, and this is one that's now pending at the FCC and has not yet been granted, although we do have all, at least the 4 commissioners, now minus 1, and the chairman's office seem to be favorable toward it. The Tell City waiver says that if an FM translator is within the interfering contour of an AM station, and I can see Tom Ray thinking now, WR, my interfering contour goes out. What is it, 550 miles or something? Well, okay, fine, Tom, but this is not for New York stations. But in any event, if a translator is within the interfering contour, the 0.025 millivolt per meter contour of the AM station, then if it's to serve an AM station, it should be allowed to move to that AM station's location to rebroadcast the AM station. And that's the basic concept of the Tell City waiver, and all other things being technically good also. It's not a question of causing interference at any other station or waiving any of the other technical rules where a translator fits or doesn't fit at a particular transmitter site. It's simply taking a translator that's somewhere on the dial, somewhere within the interfering contour of an AM station, and moving it, allowing an AM station the opportunity to acquire that translator if they can make a deal for it, and moving it to a place where the AM station can use the translator and listeners can benefit from it, because the theory is that if a translator is for sale and someone wants to sell it and it's really not doing what it should be doing where it's at, then let's make better use of it. Let's serve listeners, let's serve the public, and let's help revitalize AM stations this way.
Wow. That can an FM translator originate any HD programming? Can it be the source of an HD2 or 3?
It can rebroadcast analog, or it can rebroadcast in analog the HD2 or HD3 programming.
Right.
And this is being done in several, in some larger markets as well as in smaller markets. One of the success stories is, and this is my client again, Bud Walters, but he's got a Decatur, Illinois translator that is presumably doing, or not presumably, but is doing astounding ratings there with a new format, rebroadcasting the HD2 in that community, bringing a format that's never been in that community to that community, and in the process, doing some good for listeners. So.
Mm-hmm. But the translator itself cannot transmit HD carriers.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I've talked with the folks at ubiquity about this. And I think one of the issues, and Tom, you may want to jump in here, is that because the HD signal is such a low ERP, it's such a low signal. If you're talking about a 250 watt translator, I guess you're talking about a translator with a maximum HD signal of 25 watts. And given some of the anomalies that occur with HD signals, 25 watts really probably won't do too much. But I think the FCC's never really said a translator can't carry an HD signal. So I mean, I suppose there's still somebody that'll try. I mean, that's somebody that could be tried.
Well, that would be that'd be 25 watts if they were running a -10 carrier. But the typical carrier would either be -20, which is 2.5 watts, or -14, which would be 4% power. So 10 watts, if that much. Is so, and to be honest with you, once you get out to the area where many translators, and I think the rule still is, you're supposed to pull it off the air, aren't you, John? Or are they allowing terrestrial links?
That question again is?
Okay, yeah. Excuse me. If you have a translator, are you supposed to pull the main audio off from an off-air feed you're getting from the primary station, or does the commission allow you to have a landline link or a microwave link in place of that off-air signal from the main carrier?
As long as you're in contour, you can take the signal to the translator or get the signal to the translator however you want. It can be a landline. It can be off the air, so whatever it is. But that's in contour translators. So,
if they pull it off the air because of the nonlinearities in the system, it would probably disrupt the HD carriers. So, would the commission actually allow a station to put an HD carrier on the translator?
I guess the other question that arises is because it's a translator, and by definition it needs to rebroadcast something. I mean, I'm pretty sure the FCC would have no problem if a translator simply took the main signal of a full service FM station and rebroadcast it on the translator in analog, and then also carried the HD2 and HD3 signals of the main station not again, but in HD2 and HD3. I guess the question arises is, if you're going to put an HD2 or HD3 signal on a translator, where is that signal going to come from?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I'm from an AM station.
Which is why I asked, would they allow a terrestrial link or a microwave link other than picking it up from the main station? Because if the main station had, the HD1, the HD2, the HD3, including the analog, there's really no reason you couldn't duplicate that over, let's say, a microwave link to the translator. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it would be an exact duplicate of what's on the main carrier. So technically, that's probably an accepted form of doing it and making it work.
Yeah, I don't think the FCC would have any problem with it. I'm just not aware of anybody doing that or asking to do that. The more expansive question I get asked is whether a translator, in addition to carrying something on its analog, can then go ahead and carry something different on its HD2 or HD3.
Yeah, that was the gist of my question. Yeah.
And that I just don't know. And I guess I would ask in response to somebody asking me that question, well, what's the business reason to do this? How is this going to do something that you otherwise couldn't do? And I suppose in a large a major market or a large market, even a translator that would carry for 2 or 3 miles on an HD2, HD3 signal with programming could serve a discrete ethnic audience or specialized audience there in a large population situation. So that, I think there's a possibility there, but I'm just not aware of anybody doing that at the moment.
So, John, for some time, several years, I've heard of this ability to feed an FM translator, have it retransmit an FM broadcaster's HD2 or HD3 signal. So separate programming from the main FM, and it can rebroadcast this in analog FM. But I'm part owner of a station where I would like to do something a bit different. But I'm pretty sure the FCC doesn't allow this now, although it sure makes sense to me that they should. And that is that, let's say I'm a small market broadcaster. I am not going to spend the money that it takes to put this proprietary technology on the air known as HD 1, 2, and 3. I don't have the money to buy that equipment and pay the annual licensing fee. I want to use a different technology to go feed alternate programming to an FM translator? And
I
that
know
would
the
be
question you're going to ask already.
Why can't I feed FM Extra digital technology?
Yeah,
to
and
FM
the
translator?
audio division's pretty much said no. And this is Peter Doyle, who's Peter has taken a very keen interest in the success of HD radio. I mean, during his tenure, HD radio has been developed and put into use. And his view on the reason translators can carry HD2 and HD3 programming, is because it's a broadcast service that's designed to be received by the public. In other words, there's receivers out there. HD was put into place with the auxiliary channels to be received by the public. These other technologies you're talking about, whether it be a subcarrier type of system, or I guess you alluded to FM Extra, they aren't FCC recognized to be received by the public, and I think that's the distinction he makes. So yes, the audio division has been asked, and the answer is no.
Yeah, that's the answer I figured that it would be, and that makes a huge financial difference. I could feed a translator with a approximately $10,000 investment in an alternate technology like FM Extra. It would still be digital. It would still be a bit rate reduced audio technology, and it would almost still be the same in that in some markets there are no HD radios still. I'm thinking of one particular market where I'm a station owner, and there are no FM Extra radios either. So from a practical point of view, it doesn't matter. Nobody's listening to the HD2 or HD3 anyway, if we did have them on the air. But it's going to be hard to get somebody else to see that viewpoint, I suppose.
I think you exaggerate about no HD radios, but I understand your point.
No, really, I'm not, but okay. Hey, we are in the middle. By the way, if you're watching the show, it's the fascinating show with our guest, John Garziglia. He's a communications attorney in the Washington, D.C. area, and he presents cases before the FCC to get them to approve or move something along. You're watching This Week in Radio Tech, or listening to it. I'm your host, Kirk Harnack. Tom Ray has gotten a word in edgewise, and my goodness, I haven't let Chris Tobin just say a thing yet. Chris Tobin is also with us on this program number 160. We're glad that you're along for the show, too. Hey, our program, This Week in Radio Tech, is brought to you by my friends, because they're my employer, at Telos and Axia. Telos and Axia, and also the Omnia equipment, can all work together very, very well. And that is through this technology called audio over IP. Axia developed a technology called Livewire about 10, 11, 12 years ago now. And many different pieces of Telos gear can plug right into a Livewire network. Same thing for many pieces of Omnia gear can plug right into a Livewire network. And what does that mean for you? Well, I'll tell you what. Rather than just expound on the virtues of Livewire and the high quality and yada, 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 let me tell you a few things that one of our users have said. Dave Anderson is a consulting engineer, a contract engineer, if you will, in Florida, in the USA. And one of his clients is a radio station network called The Joy FM. They have in their cadre of equipment, they're actually using Telos Zip 1s as their studio to transmitter links. At the Joy FM, they have 7 or more transmitter sites and a couple of remote studios. They have a total of 22 Zip 1s now to get program and audio material usually from studio to transmitter, but also from studio to studio. They also recently installed a new voice over IP phone system. Now, this is an on-air phone system called the Telos VX. We just got a note from Dave Anderson today. He reminded me they have 22 Zip 1s, a new VX system, and soon they'll be ordering Axia consoles. In fact, they presented they just had a fundraiser on their station, and they presented the quote for the consoles during the fundraiser to the managing board. And Dave says, looking good for Axia for the main control room, but also smaller systems for the production rooms as well. The staff is super excited about it, let alone Avery. He's the local engineer, dreaming of a crazy simple air chain to manage. Also, Dave Anderson has been showing off his Telos VX on-air phone system to other engineers in the area, in the Tampa and Sarasota area, and said other engineers are really taking well. You know, there's another VX system in Tampa at the Cox radio stations, and they're using a really cool feature of the VX on-air phone system. They can install an app. There's a number of different apps that's on your smartphone that uses your data connectivity to make your smartphone into a G.722 audio codec. Well, G722, that's a big improvement over G711, which is the usual telephone codec. And so they can actually go do easy live remote broadcasts with 7.5 kilohertz of audio quality. Yeah, listen, I realize you're not going to want to do a symphony concert over this, but it does work great for quick live remotes, G722 audio right into their Telos VX phone system. They're doing this at a number of radio stations around the U.S. and outside the U.S. as well. So my point is all these things plug together easily. There's a lot of stations now that have an Axia system, and they're adding codecs and phone systems from Telos. And they're doing it a lot of times with simply by adding, one cable connects the phone system back into the VX system for all the audio and control to go over the same Cat5 or Cat6 cable. It becomes very easy when all the equipment speaks the same language, and that would be Livewire. Check it out on the web. You got a couple of websites you can go to, telos-systems.com or axiaaudio.com. There are white papers, especially on the Axia Audio website. Check them out and educate yourself as to how audio over IP works. There's even a whole book written about it, written by Steve Church and Skip Peasy, that you'll want to check out as well, called Audio over IP, available on Amazon and other places too. So I really appreciate Telos Systems and Axia Audio, as well as Omnia Audio, supporting this podcast and bringing it to you, and letting us, have these conversations where we bring in great people like John Garziglia, our guest on This Week in Radio Tech. Hey, Chris Tobin, you've been awfully quiet. Sorry, probably my fault. I've been yapping too much. Chris, if you were across the desk from John Garziglia, what would you be asking John about communications law and matters before the FCC?
Well, one of the matters I'm curious about, because I talk to a lot of folks that this comes up in conversation. Radio stations operating, normal parameters, the usual bit, and then they get calls from their audience, the listeners, saying that they're having trouble receiving their signal because of some other radio station, say first adjacent or maybe right on frequency, basically pirate broadcasters. How is that being handled these days? I mean, I remember years and years ago, pirate broadcasting was sort of like in the background, and you heard about it on vacant channels on the dial. Nowadays, I mean, I can travel here in the 5 boroughs, and first adjacent pirates are everywhere. It's just like ridiculous. Is there anything going on? Is there not talk, but if somebody makes a complaint, I'm assuming you have to do a writing to the FCC. What happens after that?
It's just a really nasty, involved process for the FCC to take a pirate off the air. And in some cases, it's dangerous for the FCC inspector. I mean, FCC inspectors have been threatened with guns and violence in trying to take pirates off the air. The procedure for the FCC inspector to take a pirate off the air, if the pirate doesn't cease broadcasting because the FCC inspector shows up, to really get the pirate to cease broadcasting, the FCC needs to get the Department of Justice involved. The Department of Justice, and particularly in places like New York City and other metro areas, may think it has a lot more pressing matters on its hands, safety of life type of issues. So it may not be at the highest priorities for the DOJ. Procedurally, it's just a very messy process. The FCC field offices do what they can to chase after pirates. I mean, if there is one that's particularly pernicious, interfering with a main station signal, being able for that main station to be able to supply to the FCC field office the exact location of the transmitter really does help, because many of these pirates are only broadcasting certain hours of the day, and the inspector may go out there and try to find it, but it's not on the air at the moment. So if you have an exact location for the station, that helps. There have been some states, I believe it's Florida and New Jersey and possibly Massachusetts, who have enacted state laws that go after pirates. It's been a while since I took a look at those, so I'm not sure of the exact states, and I may be wrong on those 3 states I just mentioned. But those state laws have helped in certain ways also, but it is an issue.
Well, it's definitely New Jersey, and I think New York. If they haven't enacted it, John, they're in the process of doing so. But you know, it's funny. We had an SBE meeting here in New York a couple of years ago, and we had the FCC field office in. They described what it took to get a pirate off the air, and what you said in the steps in the Department of Justice. They have to get a warrant because they can walk into a licensed broadcast station, but they can't walk into an unlicensed broadcast station without a warrant. And they said, it gets very frustrating from their aspect because they'll get a warrant, they'll show up at the place, the antennas move next door. They don't have a warrant for next door. So now they have to go back and get a warrant for next door. When they come back, the antennas move 2 houses over. and they play this whole chicken and egg game, constantly.
Well, and let me, you mentioned interference, Kirk, if I can. There's another interference issue here that I think goes back to the original subject we were talking about, FM translators, but I think is irrelevant, particularly for engineers who work with radio stations and may have this type of situation where they're looking for helping a broadcaster put a translator on the air. The FCC's rules are fairly strict that a translator cannot cause any interference to a regularly received FM signal of a full-service radio station. So in putting translators on the air, and particularly the ones we were talking about, putting 250 watters at very high heights, the experience I've heard from engineers is that these facilities really do go further than the prediction curves may predict, or one might expect just doing calculations. And oftentimes they will interfere with full-service FM stations. So engineers in helping a broadcaster put a translator on the air have to be very aware of this part of the FM translator rules, because it can dramatically affect whether. And I think Tom, you had that situation in New York. And I'm not sure who the translator owner was, but my recollection was it was interfering with a country station out of New Jersey, and it stayed on the air for maybe all of 2 or 3 days, and then was taken off the air. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about there?
I think I remember hearing about that, but I don't know the specifics in the case. So
Yeah, and that was one of those situations where the translator went on the air is a great idea, and I mean, you put a translator in the middle of New York City and you say, "Wow, look at what this is going to do." Yet it interfered with a full service station, so its lifespan was very short.
John, tell me what you might know about Franken FMs. These are Channel 6 TV stations that transmit radio on the audio of a Channel 6, and yes, many FM radios can tune that low and pick them up. So tell us about a Franken FM.
Well, it's a Channel 6. It's a Channel 6 television broadcaster or a television station. Most of them, I think, are LPTV stations now. The FCC has said that analog broadcasting on LPTV stations will cease in 2015. From the FCC standpoint, internally, I believe there's sort of a difference of opinion. I do know Peter Doyle in the audio division just takes a very much umbrage at the fact that a television station is being used for a purpose other than what it should be used for. I mean, and I can understand where he's coming from. But the video division of the FCC doesn't, I mean, really hasn't taken the same adverse view. So those that are on the air now, I mean, as long as they're running technically what they're supposed to be running, and I understand from talking with engineers there's some dispute out there as to whether a Franken FM can really do audio like some of these stations are doing on 87.75, and but whatever that is, I mean, they're on the air, and as long as they're running a video signal of something, whether it's a fireplace or a view out the window of the radio station, they're another FM service. And I mean, I have a client that's very happy running one of his. So I hope that the FCC goes and then I talk to attorneys who represent many LPTV stations across the nation, and I ask them, are LPTVs going to continue to be able to be broadcasting in analog past 2015? And they say they just really don't know, but there is a possibility.
So now we've been talking about all these lower power services. I want to talk about a really high power service. And John, I understand that you've had something to do with this. You know, we've bandied around the notion of a Class A FM and a Class B FM and a Class C FM. And some years ago, those classes were I guess, granularized a little bit more into various different levels of a Class C or a Class B or even a Class A, a 3 kilowatt or 6 kilowatt Class A. And there's you helped bring about something, a new notion, and that is a class. You know, there was a Class C and a C, a C1 and a C2 and a C3. Mm-hmm. Now there's a Class C0. What is that for? What does that do?
Well, there were many Class C stations across the United States that weren't broadcasting with anywhere near the maximum height that a Class C station can broadcast at. And maximum is 986 feet, I believe, height above average terrain. So the FCC split it in the middle. Anything, this is where I reach for my rule book, but I believe it's anything above 150 meters is a Class C0 up to 300 meters, and then 300 meters is the full Class C, or anything below 150 meters. But, I can pull out my rule book if you like and give you the exact figures.
Let me see if I can restate this a bit. There are plenty of Class C, full Class C stations that are not, that when they built the station, when they put the FM antenna up on a big honking tower, they didn't build it as to the maximum potential of a Class C station, because the maximum potential is a couple thousand feet in the air. It's a huge tower. And they say, you know what? There's a 1,000-foot tower. We're going to put our antenna on that at 100,000 watts ERP, and we're going to cover, 87, 90% of what we would have covered from 2,000 feet, and that's going to be fine. And maybe, by the way, the FAA won't let us put a 2,000-foot tower anywhere in this area because there's an airport nearby. So we're going to go with a 1,000-foot tower. So you have a Class C that's still called a Class C, but not built out to the full Class C capability. And why would other broadcasters want to say, well, then let's have another category for those guys? Is it so they can be downgraded a bit and maybe fit other stations in there? Yeah.
Because in the broadcaster circumstance that I was representing, he had a Class A station. And the spacings would not allow him to go up to a Class C3 if the other station was a full Class C. But by reducing the spacings on the Class C station down to Class C0 specifications, he was then able to upgrade his station to a Class C3. So that's how that came about.
Now, if a Class C station is downgraded to more approximating what they've actually got, what they've actually built, what's their potential for reduction of their coverage area? Now, nothing's changing about what they're transmitting, but some other station or stations may be able to go up in power on the fringes of that former Class C station now that it's a Class C0. What's the chance of their coverage area actually getting degraded a bit?
Substantial, because as we all know, every FM station really, if there was no other FM station on the dial within any, several hundred miles of the station would go for unimaginable distances. In fact, there are Class A stations on the air now that if they don't have any co-channel interference or adjacent channel interference, can go well beyond the 17 or 18 miles predicted contour up to 35, 40 miles away, can be heard very, very well. So, but once another station gets on the same channel, it will dramatically reduce that station's coverage area. And then here in the Northeast, and Tom, I'm sure, is very aware, lives with this every day, with all the short space situations for FM stations often don't even go their predicted contours because of the interference from a co-channel or adjacent channel station. So in the case of a Class C station, it allows other stations to encroach upon it and potentially reduce areas in which listeners otherwise receive perfect reception and reduce the reception out there.
Now, I guess a station that was licensed as a Class C, they wouldn't voluntarily apply to degrade themselves to a Class C0, would they? Isn't that usually the work of stations that want to move in a bit?
It is, but many stations that are full Class Cs, I mean, I've seen them voluntarily go down to Class C0 when asked. I've been rather surprised about that. But if there's FAA reasons or just business reasons why a taller tower will never be built, then the station often is a good neighbor and does reduce its class, knowing that in the end analysis it's going to have to reduce its class anyway, because one way or the other station that wants to upgrade is going to force it to downgrade, so they've made life easier.
So what could a full Class C station do to prevent from being downgraded to a C0?
It sounds like you've got a particular situation. Do you have somebody that's trying to downgrade your Class C?
I don't own. Well, actually, I own a C3 in. Actually, I own a C3 in American Samoa, and the nearest interfering station is 2,500 miles away. So it gets out pretty good. Yeah. Okay, it covers lots of seawater.
Not too many listeners out there in the ocean, are there?
No, there's not. We cover a lot of fish.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the FCC says that if a Class C station files a modification application to increase its power and gets a construction permit, then it'll be given 3 years to build out that higher height antenna, higher height tower. So I mean, a Class C station can certainly delay it, and ultimately, if the Class C station can, they can build a taller tower. Let me mention something else, though, that we're on FM classes here, because it's something that's popped up in the last 6 months that I feel fairly strongly about. I mean, I was the proponent of the Class C3 many years ago, and through the work I did with the broadcaster in Tennessee, got the Class C0 classification adopted at the FCC. But there's been a proposal for a Class C4 classification that's between Class C3, which is 25,000 watts ERP, and Class A, which is 6,000 watts ERP, and I believe the Class 4 is proposed to be 12,500 watts ERP. This may have been a good idea. In fact, it was probably a good idea 10 years ago. But my fear in today's world, when we're putting, when broadcasters are out there putting FM translators on the air in what are essentially the spaces between FM stations, and using unused spectrum to rebroadcast AM stations and also to broadcast HD2 and HD3 stations. They're putting broadcast services on the air for their listening public and making good radio stations out of them. I worry about a proposal now that would allow stations to increase their powers to the extent that many of these FM translators could very well be knocked off the air. I mean, if I was an AM station and I spent several years and perhaps tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars obtaining an FM translator, I wouldn't be very happy because translators are secondary services. And if a full power station moves in or upgrades or something, a translator can be thrown off the air and it's just no more. I would be extremely unhappy if the FCC changed its rules so I could no longer have the translator that I spent all that money and resources obtaining and was serving my listening public with it. So I'm just really not in favor of broadcasters getting behind a proposal now to allow some radio stations, and there are going to be some stations that are Class A now that might be able to increase their power by two from 6,000 to 12,500 watts. But at the same time, be knocking perhaps many translators off the air across the country. So I just wanted to mention that latest proposal that's out there. The proponents of that proposal are well aware of my views, and they've talked to me about it. And I guess I'm not sure there is any middle ground, but one suggestion that we batted back and forth is giving translators that are rebroadcasting AM stations, or possibly those that are rebroadcasting HD2 and HD3 stations, some sort of primary service status where they're not able to be knocked off the air by such a Class C4 upgrade or something like that. In other words, truly making translators that are in contour and providing a service from a locally based station some protection, and just leaving those translators that are simply extending FM service to areas that's not within the contour of the main station, I suppose, as secondary services.
John, as an attorney representing people who want to do something business-wise and technically, are you in a, I mean, I'm sure you have opinions. Is it worthwhile to try to make an economic go of putting a station in a place where, yeah, you can put it because nobody's ever wanted to put one there before. In other words, west of the Mississippi River, there's plenty of places, in the Rocky Mountains and in the Great Plains and places where there's very few people living, where you can still fit a radio station. Is there a point where, it just doesn't make sense to do this? Okay.
Well, I would challenge your proposition that there are still places to put radio stations, full-service stations. Certainly 10, 15 years ago there were, but there have been such a number of new FM allotments put out and applied for in many rural western areas that the dial's pretty full in most places now. So the question really becomes: is it worth putting a 25th service on the air in an area that's got 24 services? And I've never tried to talk a broadcaster out of putting a new service on the air, because that's what broadcasting is all about. It's about finding a niche, finding a way to serve an audience, and making a go of it. With the amazing equipment that's out there now to run radios, I do think in many cases that the broadcasting community for serving smaller rural communities may be served by the FCC relaxing some of its rules that probably had a meaning, had a value 20, 30 years ago. But in today's world, things like the main studio rule, things like a main studio having to have 2 full-time employees at it. I just don't see in today's world, where communication is by cell phone and all the other various electronic devices we use, where a resident of a community needs to be able to visit a main studio of a radio station in order to have that be a community radio station. But at this point, that's not something the FCC is proposing to do away with, but I could see that happening in the future for some smaller community stations like that.
Chris Tobin,
John,
you had this. Something.
What's that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Chris Tobin had a quick Franken FM follow-up question.
Yes.
Yeah, some time ago here in the New York City area, we do have a Franken FM on Channel 6 or thereabouts. It came on the air originally, still is, as a TV station, and video portion had, I believe, video playing or color bars or something goofy. There's video. And then the audio subcarrier was basically an FM station. What I was curious about is, and I read through the rules, because I had a friend of mine ask me this, they're transmitting a pilot frequency that actually locks on an FM radio so you can decode the stereo. But BTSC stereo is 15.7 something kilohertz, basically the video horizontal sync. But in the rules, if I read it right, I think, it says you can use almost any stereo system for it as long as it's within a certain parameter, or do I have that wrong? Because I have every couple of months when I'm at some meeting, whether it be SBE, SMPTE, or something, it comes up, the conversation, and I'm like, that's a good question. I'm just curious, because a lot of broadcasters in town just hear that and go, why is this happening? I have one other question.
So far away from that argument and that discussion because I guess basically because the FCC has never approached a broadcaster that I know of and questioned what they're doing on the audio portion of that Channel 6 carrier. I understand. I don't. Well, I'd like to say I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure I really follow the argument, but I think I alluded when I was talking about Franken FMs that there is a discussion out there as to whether broadcasters are really doing what they're supposed to be doing under the rules as far as the audio portion of the signal. I'll let you and Tom and Kirk and everyone else who wants to talk about it, but I have no idea.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fine. I know it's one of those interesting topics. Another question,
I suppose if you want to get a Franken FM off the air, that's a good argument to make. If on the other hand you own a Franken FM, you probably say you're within the rules. So,
right? No, I understand. I know. I wasn't looking to get them off the air or even in that direction. It was just sheer curiosity. Because all the years that I've worked at radio stations, and when the commission inspectors come out and all the parameters you have to maintain, blah blah blah, they were sticklers about certain parameters for an FM or AM. And then here's a Franken FM. It's sort of operating outside of those parameters, but people seem to be accepting it. So I was just curious. I wasn't looking at
you may see why Peter Doyle gets all excited about it at the audio division. That's probably one of the reasons, is because it really doesn't seem to fit, does it?
Yeah. Well, the other, no, absolutely. Now I understand. I understand completely. Second question I have, the way things are going in the communications world, I'll call it, with TV moving from their frequencies of past up to what they are now for HD TV, so that broadband carriers can get frequencies and stuff to do all kinds of wonderful things. Do you see or get a sense that somewhere down the road, FM and AM broadcasters may be in a similar boat where they may be asked or maybe told to move from where they are to somewhere else in order to allow for some other technology to come through?
I don't see it. For FM, I don't think enough spectrum is being used by FM broadcasters. I mean, what is being used is fairly efficient, and that's not really that big a swath of the spectrum when you compare to what TV broadcasters use. So I don't see anybody coming after FM spectrum. And also we have upwards of 1 billion receivers in our nation now that can receive FM radio. I mean, it's just not. There's not. If anybody even suggested it, it would create a firestorm. And the question would be why. I mean, isn't. And then as far as AM goes, it's more of a question of what other service can use AM, that AM spectrum. And I just have never really seen any argument that somebody else could better use that AM spectrum that AM broadcasters are using. Even AM broadcasters have a tough time using that spectrum for so many reasons, the interference and all the other problems. Which, Kirk, if I can mention, by the way, and I'd sort of like to ask your panelists a question, I just this afternoon was on a phone call where I was with Commissioner Pye's office in the NAB planning for the Commissioner Pye AM Revitalization Panel, which is taking place at the NAB in Las Vegas Monday, April 8th at 3 p.m. I'm one of the panelists. And if there were to be questions asked at that panel, what are the subjects? What are the hot topics that Commissioner Pye and this panel should be talking about when we're talking about AM revitalization?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, it is a good question.
Well, I guess they don't control receiver design specifications, I guess, or man-made noise specs that impact AM.
I mean, I suppose there's an argument. There's an argument that the FCC could. It's an argument I've made for many years that there should be receiver standards out there, and it's based upon the need of the public to have a reliable source of information in times of emergency, in times of catastrophe. I think we've pretty much seen that radio broadcasting is the one service out there that even if the worst happens and 19 stations are off the air in a community, there is probably one radio station on the air that can get emergency information to the community, and residents of a community, even if all power is off and the place is desolate, there are still going to be cars out there that you can turn the key and turn on the radio and get some sort of information about what's going on. And it really is the last, sort of the last link to the population. And so I've thought for many years that there should be receiver standards, but that's that's where one gets into locking horns with the CEA very, very quickly. And so
Sure.
Well, another. Oh yeah, absolutely. I've several AM stations I've worked with. The receivers was definitely quite an issue. How about a question would be, or a topic, antenna systems design, and taking new technologies and computer modeling to be able to tighten patterns and go beyond what they've done the last couple of years with MOMs and everything else, moments of measurement, and say, hey, let's be more creative, because there were times when I worked for AM stations. We were directional, but we were trying to find a way of coming up with a broadcast continuity plan, a disaster recovery plan, and everything we had backed up, just like you'd expect, except one thing: the antenna system. We had no way of relocating or setting up a temporary monopole, say on top of a building or a location where we can operate, because there's just no provision anywhere. And most of the folks at the commission were like, yeah, no, we don't have anything on the books that covers that, so sorry. Meanwhile, there are plenty of systems and technologies available that you could probably do it if you just sat there and did some modeling and testing. Does that sound like something that would be of interest or make sense?
Well, in emergency situations, the FCC is very flexible in allowing AM stations to go on the air with almost anything. I mean, there are many instances of AM stations now running with long wire antennas because of issues that they've had with their main antenna systems. And I think one of the things to look at in this AM revitalization effort that's being taken by the FCC is the possibility of using antenna systems that are less expensive or perhaps don't have the efficiency standards that the FCC has up till now required in an effort to make AM broadcasting, if you will, less expensive for broadcasters that really can't afford to do it the way it's been done all these years. So I think there is a movement afoot for that. Yeah.
Tom Ray, you had a quick
Yes, sir.
question about LPFM, I think.
I actually no, John. It was more.
LPTV.
Kirk, it was more. More on LPTV, and maybe you can enlighten me on this. With LPFM, you take out a license and you serve your community of license, and you've got a certain service contour that has to cover the community of license. Why is it that they let an LPTV station locate wherever they want? And I'll use an example. There's an LPTV with a transmitter located on a building in New York City that is licensed to a town that's not, well, I was going to say not too far from me. It's actually 30 minutes from where I'm sitting right now, which is a good 70 miles from the building in New York City. Now, this is a 15,000 watt transmitter. There's no way in God's universe you're going to see that station in this city. Why would the commission allow that to happen?
I guess the only commonality between LPTV and LPFM is the L and P in the name of the services. Truly. I mean, LPTVs have for years been allowed to originate programming. Basically, they're mini TV stations. And they've had, except for the Class A LPTVs, which do have community service requirements and public file requirements and things like that. But in exchange, they get protection from being a secondary service. But the run-of-the-mill LPTV has basically been able to do whatever they want programming-wise. While with LPFMs, there's been such a consternation about who's going to be broadcasting, what are they broadcasting, are they community-based, and so on and so forth. And I'm not saying any of that is bad for LPFM, but it's just been there's a total disconnect. They really are totally different services. I mean, one of the things I said for many years before LPFMs came into being was that the world didn't end when the FCC allowed TV translators to originate programming, and I didn't think the world would end if the FCC allowed FM translators to originate programming. Well, that has never come to pass. I mean, what we have had is the ability to rebroadcast AMs and the ability to broadcast HD2s and HD3s on translators, but never the ability to originate programming. And at least at this point, it doesn't appear like that's any time in our future. But we have had LPFMs become a service out there.
Guys, we got to take a right turn real fast here before we have to close the show and come to the end of the road. I want to ask John about his Tesla Roadster. This sounds so cool. Tell me about it.
Just a minute here. Let me lean forward. I know this is lousy TV to lean like this, but talking about this. Have I got it there? There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that little thing. It's a great car. It's got an electric engine. It's got 6,800 laptop batteries in it, and it's got 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds.
Holy cow!
Quietly, like whoosh. And it is so much.
And how much gas does it take?
Gas?
None.
0.
Yeah.
Wow. Kirk, have you encountered one of those? Have you encountered an electric car, Kirk, yet?
Not knowingly. Maybe a Nissan Leaf driving past me at the Publix parking lot.
Well, there are some cabs and there are some electric cars driving around New York City, and it's the weirdest thing to be standing at an intersection waiting to cross the road, and this thing comes along. You can't hear it.
You're a pedestrian. That's no fun. No. That's, and you're one of these people who want to put noise in the car. Is that right, Tom?
Come on. That's fun, John. And you know what? For me as the pedestrian, it's not a lot of fun because people like to run us over.
Now, my view is if the car is going slow enough that you can't hear the car, the tire noise, then it's the car's responsibility, the driver's responsibility to watch out for pedestrians. If the car is going fast enough, there's tire noise and wind noise from the car, then that's pedestrians got to watch out for the car. That's my theory.
I'm in favor of loud pipes on Teslas.
ouch, ouch, ouch. But no, it's a blast to drive. An electric car driving experience is just so totally different from an IC, an internal combustion engine car, because it just instant response and a torque curve that's linear all the way up. I mean, you floor it. No problems at traffic lights. No problems merging on highways. No problem passing on highways. It's fun to drive. It makes my morning commute and afternoon commute something to look forward to.
Hey, John, how far can you go on a charge? And is this one of those cars that actually charges itself, or do you plug it in at night?
A perpetual motion machine?
Oh well, no. There are some cars out there that when you
cars that
I think it's Toyotas that work off.
That would be a great invention. No, it's got a max range of 240 miles. The nominal range, or the normal average charge, is 180 miles, which is about an 80% charge in the batteries, which is what Tesla says should be the charge every night, not to charge at max. So every morning when I take it out of my garage, I can go 180 miles, and for commuting, I do about 50 miles a day. And so I can, go back and forth home to work and back home, and go out to the suburbs several times and not have to worry about the charge. So it's 180 miles. Take one a long way when it's a commuting situation. I mean, I have taken on road trips, and the question arises, was it fun? And best I can say, it was a challenge. It's sort of like the way people describe it. It's like being an airplane pilot. You get in and you make sure that you have enough fuel to get to your destination, because if you don't, you're in big trouble.
How long does it take you to charge it? What's the typical charging time on that to get to the 80% point?
50 amp charger it's a 50 amp plug in my home, which is a dryer plug, and 240 volts. And if it's fully discharged, it'll take about 6 hours to fully charge. But on my daily commute, it's about an hour and a half. So if I was to arrive home after a daily commute and I wanted to go on some, humongous drive that evening, it'd be an hour and a half and it'd be fully charged.
Interesting.
What was your main interest in looking at this car and buying one?
It's a very perverse reason. The Virginia government decided for I-66 and the Dulles Toll Road that has carpool lanes that as of June 30th, 2011, that unless you got the clean fuel plates by that date, you would forever be barred from getting clean fuel plates for a car like the Tesla to be able to use those lanes. Now, up till then, I had a gasoline engine car, and for 25 years, I had a carpool every morning. Different people, but it was interesting. I mean, these were slugs I picked up at bus stops and things, and I would carpool to work every morning. But there were times when I was minus a carpooler, and I would be sitting in traffic and not able to use the carpool lane. So I always figured my last resort was, if the carpool ever ceased working, I'd get a hybrid or whatever and stick clean fuel plates on it. And then Virginia decided to change its law, and I saw that I had one last chance to get a hybrid. I went and looked at a Volt. I mean, this shows, you have to understand, I enjoy cars. So I was driving a BMW M3 at that point. And previous to that, I had a 1993 M5, which was just a fantastic car. So here I am with this M3, deciding what electric car do I want. And I think, Tom, you talked about the Leaf, and that's sort of boring. And then there's a Volt, and that's a nice car, but I just couldn't get myself excited. And then my wife said, "Why don't you go look at the Tesla?" And I learned a long time ago, and this was, I can say this because I've told her, but the reason I got my first M5 was she said, "John, you should go look at these kind of cars. You like cars. And when your wife says to go look at a car, don't even ask questions."
Yeah. So did you buy it the day you saw it? Did you have to think about it for a while? Did you have to go compare?
Well, the challenge was I wasn't, when I finally convinced my wife this should be a purchase I should make, we were coming up on the June 30th deadline, and my fear was that Tesla, with their lead time for delivering cars, wasn't going to be able to get me a car by June 30th. But, remarkably, when I walked in the showroom here in Washington, D.C., they had one they could ship to me from California just like that. So there you go.
Good story. I love it. And obviously you're enjoying the car. How long do you expect it to last?
That's a real good question. And interestingly, if you look at the Tesla forums, the discussion boards that talk about electric cars and the motors and the power electronics and the batteries and things like that, I mean, there's a fairly robust discussion about maintenance costs versus battery replacement in 7 or 8 years and the cost of battery replacement. I mean, I guess I bought it with the attitude, and I know this is probably not a great attitude or not a prudent attitude, but, one thing in my life, a car I have fun with, and I'm pretty prudent with most other things, I think. I really didn't buy it with the view of, how long is it going to last? I mean, it could last just as long as a laptop, which is very scary, because that's sort of the way we're going with all sorts of products in today's world. But I, not to prolong this discussion into too much, but I saw with cars, other cars, internal combustion engine cars, a move toward sort of planned obsolescence with the way the cars are being built in today's world. That they really aren't made to, go more than 200,000 miles or so, because once a car gets to a certain point, and I'm talking about cars that have been built in the last 10 years, the cost of repairing a car with electronic and so many different sensors and things, and it is really gets almost beyond people to be able to afford it. So we may be toward cars being disposable items after 4 or 5 years. I really hope the Tesla's not like that. I'm going to do everything I can not to have it like that, but who knows?
Awesome. That's a dream to drive one of those things and to own one, to make it your everyday driver. I think that's awfully cool. Thanks for sharing that. And if we ever have you on again, I'd love to get some in-car video from you. That would just be awesome to see that and experience what it feels like, and to accelerate it 3-point-something seconds to 60. Holy cow!
Come visit. I'll give you a ride.
Kind of lays you back in the seat, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's a nice push.
It doesn't seat 4, does it? It seats 2, right?
It's a roadster. Built Lotus Elise body.
Cool. Hey, folks, you've been watching This Week in Radio Tech. Our guest, so glad he took extra time out of his day and from his law office in Washington, D.C. to join us. John Garziglia, who is a communications attorney in Washington, D.C. John, say the name of your law firm again.
It's Womble Carlyle Sandridge Rice in Washington, D.C.
And that's WCSR.com if you haven't caught it on the lower third on the set. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. WCSR, not a radio station, but they do help radio stations. WCSR.com. Thanks again for being with us, John. I sure appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And also Chris Tobin from Manhattan, New York. Thank you very much for being with us, Chris.
Oh, always. Thank you, Kirk. Thank you, John, very much. It was a great evening, and the topics and your discussion was excellent. Thanks, Tom.
Tom Ray. Tom from the Hudson Valley. Appreciate you being here.
And I would echo Chris's sentiments as well. John generally, I've worked with him for a number of years, and he's just generally good people. And it was a very interesting evening, interesting topic. And of course, it was always good to be here.
All right. Our show's been brought to you by the folks at Telos at telos-systems.com and at AxiaAudio.com. AxiaAudio.com. Thanks very much to Andrew Zarian and the GFQ Network for producing and hosting our show. If you'd like, you can check out our show at thisweekinradiotech.com or also at gfqnetwork.com. Either place will let you watch previous shows, or listen, or download, or subscribe to the feeds of various shows. So you can have them downloaded to your PC or your iPad or iPod automatically, or even your Google Nexus device, or even your phone, and make it a lot easier. You don't have to worry about it. It'll just show right up. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.
That's all the bandwidth we can pilfer this week. Another TWiRT has propagated, and all the transmitters and audio equipment live happily ever after, thanks to the handsome engineer and his kind, benevolent care. We'll be back next week.
Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
This Week in Radio Tech. Subscribe to iTunes and you'll never miss a show. Search for This Week in Radio Tech in the iTunes Store. Soliciting is strictly encouraged. If you liked today's show, tell a friend. If you didn't like it, we were never here.
Kirk Harnack's wardrobe provided by the Salvation Army and the Red Cross Disaster Relief Services. Hair and makeup provided by Penelope Garcia Hernandez Weinberg.
He's unique, wouldn't you say?
I just want to get it over with.
This ends this transmission.
Tango, Whiskey, India, Romeo, Tango.
Signing off. Okay.